An elite MI6 covert unit is sent deep into enemy territory to recover a dangerous, programmable pathogen known by the codename Snowflake, stolen by a shadowy techno-terror group called Eden. Among the operatives is Field Agent Hattie Shaw. The team storms the facility, swiftly neutralizing Eden guards, and Hattie secures the virus from a high-security containment case. Their extraction is abruptly interrupted by Brixton Lore, a former MI6 operative who has since been enhanced with advanced cybernetic upgrades and now serves Eden. Calm and unfazed by weapons aimed at him, Brixton coldly evaluates the squad before dismantling them with frightening efficiency, deflecting bullets, overpowering agents, and asserting his superiority with ease. Hattie attempts to escape by barricading herself inside a nearby truck. She guns the engine under heavy fire, but the vehicle overturns during the chaos. Realizing capture is inevitable, she makes a desperate choice, injecting Snowflake in her own body to keep it out of enemy hands, then manages to flee the scene. Brixton hijacks MI6 communications and falsely reports that Hattie stole the virus and murdered her entire unit. He orders Eden forces to ensure she stays isolated and hunted, while he personally prepares to reclaim the virus from her. Elsewhere, two very different operatives are introduced. Luke Hobbs, a no-nonsense DSS agent, goes about his day in Los Angeles, while Deckard Shaw, a former MI6 assassin, attends an upscale event in London. Both receive mysterious mission calls and track down separate leads. Despite facing heavily guarded targets, each man dismantles his opposition with trademark skill. Hobbs interrogates his suspect in a Chinese karaoke bar, using intimidation and a tattoo needle to extract information about rumors of a supervirus circulating online. When the man comes up empty, Hobbs leaves him with a permanent reminder of the encounter. Meanwhile, Shaw suspends his contact from a high-rise window, pressing him for intel on Eden. When the man proves useless, Shaw leaves him dangling as a warning. Hobbs later meets his daughter Sam for lunch, praising her academic success. She shows him a family photo she found while working on a school project, featuring Hobbs and his estranged brother. Hobbs avoids the subject, telling her that their small family is enough. Shaw, on the other hand, visits his mother Magdalene in prison. She scolds him playfully for not helping her escape yet and asks about Hattie, reminding him how close the siblings once were. Though reluctant, Shaw is clearly affected. As the visit ends, Magdalene casually reveals she has already slipped out of her restraints. Back in the U.S., Hobbs is confronted by CIA agent Victor Lockcatch, who reveals the true nature of Snowflake, a weapon capable of liquefying a person's internal organs. Locke explains that Hattie is now being labeled a rogue agent, blamed for her team's deaths, and that the scientist who created the virus has vanished. Despite Hobbs' resistance, the mission is already approved. Another operative has been assigned, and the world is at risk. Reluctantly, Hobbs agrees to help. At the same time, Shaw is approached by another CIA agent. Initially dismissive, Shaw changes his mind when he sees Hattie's photo. He's told that helping recover Snowflake could secure her immunity. For his sister's sake, Shaw accepts the deal. The CIA quietly anticipates the inevitable collision between the two men. Hattie, now on the run, refuses MI6's demand to surrender, knowing it would mean her death. She rigs her apartment with explosives and disappears before they can reach her. Eventually, Hobbs and Shaw cross paths. The meeting is explosive. Hobbs views Shaw as reckless and destructive, while Shaw considers Hobbs a blunt instrument with no subtlety. After a heated confrontation, they refuse to work together, agreeing instead to compete, each believing he'll be the one to recover Snowflake first. Hobbs begins, tracking Hattie's movements as she checks into a hotel under a disguise. Shaw follows her trail to her abandoned apartment, carefully bypassing the traps she left behind. Inside, he discovers her hidden computer setup and starts digging for clues, bringing both men closer to the same target, whether they like it or not. As Hattie exits the hotel, she unexpectedly comes face to face with Hobbs. He calmly orders her to stop resisting and come with him quietly. Hattie responds with a polite refusal, then immediately smashes him with a biker helmet. She hurls anything within reach at him, but Hobbs absorbs every hit like a wall, repeating that she's under arrest. He manages to snap a cuff onto one of her wrists, but Hattie isn't finished. She drags him into a chokehold, only for Hobbs to lift her clean off the ground and restrain her with sheer strength. At the same time, Shaw is digging through Hattie's computer system when Eden's soldiers ambush him, demanding his surrender. Shaw responds instantly, killing one attacker and launching into a relentless fight. The agents keep coming, but Shaw powers through the punishment, breaking bones and sending one man flying through a window. During the chaos, one of Hattie's grenades is dislodged, but Shaw knocks out the final attacker just in time and disables the explosive. Elsewhere, Lore arrives at an Eden facility to undergo another painful cybernetic enhancement. As the procedure begins, the Eden director explains their vision, an evolved race of technologically perfected humans, with Lore serving as the prototype. Hobbs escorts Hattie to a CIA-safe location and presses her for the virus's whereabouts. She insists she doesn't know where it is. Hobbs admits he believes she didn't kill her team based on how she fights, but the rest of the world sees her as a traitor. He refuses to let her leave, warning her of the virus's catastrophic potential. When Hobbs receives a call from his daughter, Sam, he steps away, leaving a young CIA agent to guard Hattie. The moment Hobbs turns his back, Hattie slips free from her restraints and overpowers the agent, taking his weapon. Hobbs returns mid-escape attempt and tries to restrain her again, just as Shaw storms into the safe house, demanding Hobbs release her. Shaw reveals the truth. Hattie is his sister. An argument erupts between the two men over how to handle the situation, but Hattie interrupts with a shocking revelation. The virus isn't hidden somewhere else. It's sealed inside microscopic capsules embedded in her hand. Before anyone can react, Eden forces led by Lore crash through the windows in a hail of gunfire. Hattie is knocked unconscious and dragged down the side of the building. Hobbs and Shaw take out several attackers. Hobbs grabs onto an enemy's grappling line to descend, while Shaw opts for the elevator. Hobbs releases the line mid-fall, slamming into another agent on the way down. Hattie regains consciousness during the descent and struggles free from Lore, sending both of them crashing onto a glass rooftop. Before Lore can recover, Hobbs smashes through the ceiling, dropping everyone to the level below. Shaw reaches the ground floor and battles Eden agents head-on as chaos erupts. In the confusion, Hattie slips away. Hobbs confronts Lore directly, but Lore sends him flying with a single punch. Shaw steps in, and the two recognize each other, revealing a shared past. They were once allies until Shaw was ordered to kill him. Shaw attacks, but Lore easily overpowers him. Hobbs lobs a grenade near Lore, flipping a car onto him long enough to escape. Shaw scoops Hattie into his car, but Hobbs refuses to be left behind and jumps in as well. Lore effortlessly throws the wrecked car aside and dispatches two riders to pursue them while he follows. A high-speed chase tears through the streets. Shaw weaves through traffic in his supercar as Hobbs fires back when he can. Lore closes the distance on his advanced bike, blasting one of their tires. Shaw still pushes forward. Another tire is shot out, but Shaw pulls a sudden blind U-turn, sending Lore crashing into a bus. Shaw escapes as Lore vows revenge. Back at Eden headquarters, Lore returns furious. The organization hacks into global news feeds, branding Hobbs and Shaw as international terrorists. The trio abandon their car and disappear into the city, only to see their faces plastered across every screen. Shaw explains that Eden isn't just a terrorist group. It's a technological cult determined to reshape humanity by force. Hobbs wants to return to the CIA, but Shaw insists they leave the city immediately. When neither will back down, Hattie decides to act alone, determined to find someone capable of removing the virus. Hobbs finally reveals that the scientist who created Snowflake is still alive and knows where to find him. Meanwhile, Lore meets with the Eden director, outlining his plan to kill Hobbs and Shaw and extract the virus from Hattie. The director demands the virus, but sees potential in Hobbs and Shaw, insisting they should be recruited instead of eliminated, powerful assets for Eden's future. Brixton Lore isn't convinced that recruiting the two operatives will work. He points out that the last time he tried to bring Deckard Shaw into Eden, he was rewarded with a bullet to the head. The Eden director reminds him that compliance was never optional, it was always a command. Elsewhere, Luke Hobbs calls his daughter Sam, urging her to stay inside since the CIA has placed her under surveillance. Agent Locke reveals he's been monitoring the call the entire time, and Hobbs begrudgingly thanks him for keeping an eye on her. The group questions scientist Rio about Snowflake and learns the horrifying truth. In just 42 hours, the virus capsules embedded in Hattie Shaw will dissolve, turning airborne and spreading across the globe within days. When asked why he would ever create something so deadly, Rio explains he was misled. Eden hired him under the pretense of developing an advanced vaccine delivery system, only to secretly reprogram it into a bioweapon targeting anyone who opposes their ideology. To save Hattie, the virus capsules must be removed, but there's only one safe method. The extraction device, capable of doing so, is locked inside a heavily fortified Eden facility in Ukraine. Rio bluntly warns them that attempting this mission will likely get them all killed. The team returns to Shaw's place, where he begins forging passports and biometric identities. However, at the airport, Hobbs, traveling under the ridiculous alias Mike Oxmall, is detained by security. It quickly becomes clear Shaw arranged this on purpose, believing Hobbs would only slow them down. As Shaw and Hattie prepare to depart, Hobbs suddenly boards the plane anyway, calling Shaw a choice insult as he takes his seat. Meanwhile, Rio reaches his car, only for Lore to appear out of the shadows with a chilling grin. During the flight, Hobbs and Shaw resume their bickering, waking Air Marshal Dinkley, who correctly deduces one as law enforcement and the other a spy. A former Marine eager for action, he offers his help. They turn him down, and he leaves him his card before walking off. Rio is dragged back to Eden headquarters and suspended by chains inside their testing range. Lore orders him to extract Snowflake from Hattie. When Rio refuses, Lore ignites a flamethrower inches from his face to motivate compliance. The trio lands in Moscow, where Shaw reconnects with his former flame, Margarita. She provides intelligence on the Eden facility housing the extraction machine. Hattie devises a bold plan. She'll allow herself to be captured, ensuring direct access to the device, while Hobbs and Shaw infiltrate from the outside. With no better options, everyone agrees. Margarita supplies them with weapons, tech, and explosives. Hattie is delivered to Lore, bound and presented as a lone fugitive. Lore threatens to kill her if this is a trap, then takes her back to the facility. Inside, she's escorted toward the extraction lab. At the same time, Hobbs and Shaw pilot a jet toward the compound, eject midair, and parachute directly into a missile silo before breaching the building. Lore orders Rio to prepare Hattie for the procedure. Hobbs quietly neutralizes a lone guard and plants an explosive set to detonate in 45 minutes. Shaw enters through another access point and is immediately swarmed by armed guards. He tears through them with ruthless efficiency. Hobbs uses his unconscious opponent to bypass security, while Shaw repeatedly slams defeated enemies' faces against a retinal scanner until the correct clearance is granted. The victory is short-lived. Eden forces overwhelm both men, knocking them unconscious. Hattie is strapped to the extraction table, but fights back, taking out her guards, freeing herself, and seizing the device. Rio decides to follow her. They storm through another lab, where Hattie quickly incapacitates more agents. Hobbs awakens chained to a chair, with Shaw restrained opposite him. Lore activates batteries connected to their restraints, sending painful electrical currents through their bodies. He recounts how Eden approached him and Shaw years ago, presenting data predicting humanity's collapse. Lore believes Snowflake is the brutal correction the world needs. Hobbs calls him a mass murderer, but Lore is unmoved. He reveals Eden originally ordered him to kill Shaw when Shaw rejected their offer, and that being shot only helped transform him into something stronger. Laura offers them one final chance to join Eden, promising enhancements like his own. At that moment, Hobbs notices Hattie slip into the room, disguised as a lab technician. Without hesitation, Hobbs tells Laura they accept the offer. As Laura reacts, Hobbs subtly stalls for time, signaling to Shaw that their real plan is already underway. Hattie suddenly steps into the open, pressing a gun against Brixton Laura's head and threatening to end him. She pulls the trigger, but nothing happens. Before Laura can react, Enrio blasts him with a flamethrower. The distraction gives Luke Hobbs and Deckard Shaw the opening they need. They break free, overpower nearby agents, and jump onto a four-wheeler to escape. They spot Hattie Shaw, scoop her up, and learn she's hidden the extraction device in another truck. Hobbs leaps off to retrieve it, while Shaw and Hattie draw enemy fire and race out of the facility with Eden forces close behind. Back inside the collapsing base, Laura executes Enrio without hesitation. As explosions tear through the compound, Laura uses Hobbs' truck as a ramp to mount his motorcycle just seconds before the facility detonates. He deploys aerial drones to continue the pursuit. Shaw pushes his damaged vehicle to its limits, bursting through a building moments before the drones catch up. Hobbs destroys one drone with the truck, while Shaw launches out of the structure and takes out the second midair. The four-wheeler barely survives the landing, forcing Shaw to regroup with Hobbs, who plows through multiple enemy vehicles. As Shaw hands Hattie off to Hobbs, Laura reappears, narrowly missing his chance to seize her. He opens fire and leaps on a Hobbs truck. Hobbs passes control to Hattie and joins Shaw on the back as Laura boards the vehicle. The three clash, but Laura's enhanced strength overwhelms them. When a massive tower collapses nearby, Laura is forced to disengage to avoid being crushed. They finally come to a stop, but the extraction machine has been damaged. Exhausted and running out of time, Hattie suggests using the dangerous first option. Shaw refuses, unwilling to lose his sister. With nowhere left to hide and the entire country hunting them, Hobbs reluctantly proposes a last resort. Returning to his homeland, Samoa, Air Marshal Dinkley arranges the flight, once again offering backup. Once again, he's declined. In Samoa, Hobbs leads them to a remote family compound and hesitantly knocks. The door opens to his older brother Jonah, who greets him with a punch, furious over Hobbs disappearing for decades and returning as a wanted man. Before things escalate, their mother intervenes, overjoyed to see her son again. Inside, Hobbs pleads with Jonah to examine the extraction device and help save the world. Jonah refuses outright and starts throwing them out, until their mother threatens everyone with her slipper, forcing Jonah to back down. Meanwhile, Laura undergoes repairs at Eden headquarters. The director finally agrees that Hobbs and Shaw must be eliminated. Eden tracks them to Samoa and mobilizes for a full assault. As preparations begin, Hobbs opens up to Hattie about his past, how his father was a criminal who dragged his sons into his operations, and how Hobbs eventually turned him in to protect his family, abandoning the island afterward. Jonah later reveals he rebuilt his life, running a custom auto shop with global clients. Hobbs plans to arm everyone, only to discover their mother has replaced every gun with traditional Samoan weapons, because she despises firearms. Shaw and Hattie realize just how bad things are, but they commit to fighting with whatever they have. The family springs into action. Jonah repairs the extraction device. Hobbs, Shaw, and the brothers prepare traps and explosives. Hattie hacks an Eden glove she recovered, creating a brief window to disable enemy weapons. Later, Hobbs joins Hattie as she watches the sunset. She regrets distancing herself from her brother for so long, realizing family is all she truly has. Hobbs admits he feels the same about his daughter. They promise to do better. With 30 minutes left before Snowflake goes airborne, Jonah finishes the device and initiates the extraction sequence, only for alarms to sound. As they mobilize, Hobbs apologizes to Jonah for leaving and promises never to disappear again. Jonah accepts, and the brothers embrace. Shaw positions Hattie near the device, ready for a fast escape if needed. Moments later, Lore and his strike team arrive on the island. Hobbs steps forward, rallying his brothers and calling on their Samoan heritage. Lore orders his men to open fire, but their weapons fail. Hobbs triggers an explosion, and Shaw ignites a ring of fire, trapping the enemy force. With the trap sprung, Hobbs and his family charge forward, launching into a brutal, all-out battle against Eden's elite troops. The brothers tear through Eden's forces, overpowering agents left and right, but Brixton Lore continues to dominate the battlefield. Amid the chaos, Hattie Shaw is seized by enemy soldiers. Deckard Shaw reacts instantly, charging in and brutally taking down anyone who gets near her. A gunship suddenly touches down nearby. Disoriented but determined, Hattie tries to navigate through the fighting, only for Lore to grab her and drag her aboard the chopper. Spotting this, Shaw jumps into a heavy-duty wrecker truck, with Luke Hobbs leaping on the back just as the helicopter prepares for takeoff. Shaw guns the engine and launches the truck forward. Hobbs hurls a chain upward, latching it onto the chopper's landing gear. Shaw floors it, dragging the aircraft along the ground as the pilots struggle to gain altitude. Growing impatient, Lore throws one pilot out and forces the chopper into the air, lifting the truck onto two wheels. Just in time, 3 more trucks arrive, each securing chains to the wrecker. Together, they barely prevent the chopper from escaping. Lore attempts to swing the vehicles toward a cliff, but the drivers hit their boosters simultaneously, shredding the helicopter's engine and snapping it back toward the ground. As Eden's weapon systems come back online, gunfire rains down, forcing the supporting trucks to detach. Shaw speeds through a field of hidden traps while the chopper nearly breaks free again. Hobbs digs in, gripping the chains with raw strength long enough to secure them once more. Inside the aircraft, Hattie fights back, overpowering her captors and damaging critical controls. The helicopter spirals out of control, crashing violently and dragging the truck off a cliff with it. Lore is the first to emerge from the wreckage. He spots Hattie, now with only 4 minutes remaining on the extraction timer, and orders one of his men to kill her once the process is complete. Downstream, Hobbs and Shaw pull themselves from a river, calling out for Hattie. Lore steps forward to confront them, declaring this is where it ends. The two attack together, but Lore easily anticipates their moves, countering with frightening speed. He mocks their humanity, brushing them aside again and again. Refusing to quit, Hobbs and Shaw regroup. Hobbs absorbs a crushing blow, creating an opening for Shaw to strike. They repeat the maneuver, slowly wearing Lore down. Finally, Hobbs lifts him and slams him hard onto a jagged rock. Nearby, Hattie completes the extraction just in time. She incapacitates the agent guarding her and rushes to join the others, standing over a defeated Lore. Shaw mourns what Lore became, but refuses to execute him. Suddenly, the Eden director activates a hidden self-destruct mechanism embedded within Lore's body. The enhancement overloads, and Lore collapses, tumbling into the ocean below. Moments later, the director hijacks a nearby helicopter and speaks directly to Hobbs, revealing they share a past. With a promise that this reunion is far from over, he vanishes, leaving Hobbs, Shaw, and Hattie victorious, but aware that the war is not truly finished. Analysis. What happens when a franchise built on street racing suddenly decides to turn itself into a full-blown superhero action movie? No. Seriously, when did cars stop being enough? Because Fast and Furious presents Hobbs and Shaw isn't just another spin-off. It's a loud, unapologetic declaration that the Fast franchise has officially left realism in the rearview mirror and floored it straight into comic book territory. This is a movie where fists are stronger than physics, where villains look like they walked out of a cyberpunk nightmare, and where 2 men with egos larger than explosions are forced to work together, whether they like it or not. Released in 2019, this film didn't just expand the Fast and Furious universe. It redefined what kind of universe this franchise wanted to be. Some fans loved it, some fans hated it, and others asked the most important question of all. Is this even Fast and Furious anymore? Today, we're diving deep into Fast and Furious presence. Hobbs and Shaw. Not just what happens, but why it exists, what it says about modern action cinema, masculinity, family, technology, and how blockbuster movies now chase spectacle over speedometers. This isn't a recap. This isn't a summary. This is a full cinematic breakdown. So buckle up, because logic is optional, gravity is negotiable, and family still matters. The movie is titled Fast and Furious Presence. Genre-wise, this film sits at the crossroads of action, sci-fi, buddy comedy, and spy thriller. The runtime clocks in at around 137 minutes. The language is English, and it's a Hollywood production through Universal Pictures. But more importantly, this movie exists because two characters became too popular to ignore. At its core, Hobbs and Shaw is built on one irresistible idea. What if two alpha personalities who absolutely despise each other were forced to save the world together? Luke Hobbs is a lawman, disciplined, duty-bound, and built like a tank. Deckard Shaw is a rogue operative, stylish, sarcastic, and morally flexible. They are opposites. They clash constantly, and that's exactly the point. The story kicks off when a deadly new threat emerges. Not just a terrorist, but something far more unsettling. A man enhanced by technology, capable of superhuman feats, operating under a shadowy organization with global ambitions. At the center of the chaos is a powerful biological weapon, one that could wipe out millions if it falls into the wrong hands. Enter Hattie Shaw, an MI6 agent who becomes the human key to stopping this catastrophe. From London to Moscow, from skyscrapers to island strongholds, the movie unfolds as a globe-trotting chase where alliances are tested, family ties are challenged, and old grudges are dragged into the spotlight. What makes this story interesting isn't its complexity, it's how unapologetically simple it is. This is a movie about force versus finesse, rules versus rebellion, strength versus speed. And the biggest question isn't whether they'll save the world, it's how they'll survive each other long enough to do it. Let's start with Luke Hobbs. Played by Dwayne Johnson, Hobbs represents order, authority, and physical dominance. He believes in systems, badges, and doing things the right way. But beneath that rigid exterior is a man haunted by fractured family ties and unresolved pride. Then there's Deckard Shaw, portrayed by Jason Statham. Shaw is chaos with a tailored suit. He's driven by loyalty to blood above all else, and his moral compass points firmly toward protect my own, no matter the cost. Their dynamic is the engine of the film. Every insult, every punch, every one-upmanship moment is designed not just for laughs, but to expose how similar they really are. The antagonist, Brixton Lore, played by Idris Elba, is ideology made flesh. He believes humanity is outdated, flawed, and ready to be replaced by something stronger, faster, and more efficient. He's not evil for money. He's evil for evolution. Hattie Shaw, played by Vanessa Kirby, grounds the film emotionally. She's capable, intelligent, and refuses to be a damsel, serving as the moral bridge between brute force and human compassion. Beneath the explosions, Hobbs and Shaw is obsessed with one idea. What does strength really mean? Is it muscle, technology, family, or restraint? Brixton represents the future without humanity, efficiency without empathy. Hobbs represents tradition, structure, discipline, and moral duty. Shaw exists in between, loyalty over law, emotion over protocol. The movie constantly pits organic strength versus artificial power. Time and time again, it argues that no amount of cybernetic enhancement can replace human connection. And yes, family is still the backbone. But unlike Dominic Toretto's Chosen Family, Hobbs and Shaw explore blood family, legacy, and the burden of expectation. The Samoan sequences aren't just spectacle. They symbolize heritage, roots, and the idea that real power comes from knowing who you are. David Leitch directs this movie like a graphic novel come to life. Everything is exaggerated. Punches linger, impacts echo, slow motion is weaponized. The pacing is relentless, but intentionally so. Leach knows this isn't realism, it's mythology. Compared to his work on John Wick, this film trades elegance for scale. Compared to Deadpool 2, it replaces irony with testosterone. It's bold, it's excessive, and it knows exactly what it's doing. Visually, Hobbs and Shaw is glossy and hyper-stylized. The camera loves motion, spinning shots, low angles, and kinetic framing that make characters feel larger than life. Color grading shifts with geography. Cold blues for urban locations, warm earth tones for Samoa, sterile whites for technological environments. The action choreography is clean, readable, and intentionally theatrical, prioritizing impact over realism. The score by Tyler Bates blends electronic pulses with heavy percussion, reinforcing the man versus machine theme. Sound design amplifies every punch, every engine rev, every explosion, making the movie feel louder than life. Silence is rare, but when it appears, it emphasizes emotional beats rather than suspense. Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham carry this movie through sheer chemistry. Their banter feels natural, their rivalry believable, and their eventual respect earned. Idris Elba brings charisma to a potentially flat villain, while Vanessa Kirby adds intelligence and emotional weight. No one is chasing realism, they're chasing iconography. The editing is sharp, fast, and rhythmic. Scenes rarely overstay their welcome, and transitions are designed to maintain momentum. The runtime is long, but the movie rarely feels slow because it's always escalating. This film reflects Hollywood's shift towards spin-off universes and character-driven expansions. It exists because audiences fell in love with Hobbs and Shaw, and studios followed the money. It also reflects modern anxieties about technology, surveillance, and human obsolescence. At a deeper level, Hobbs and Shaw is a rejection of cold progress. It argues that evolution without morality leads to domination, not improvement. The faceless villain organization represents modern systems without accountability. And the final message is simple. Humanity, with all its flaws, is still worth fighting for. Critics were divided. Audiences largely enjoyed it. The movie performed strongly at the box office and proved that Fast and Furious could survive outside its core cast. It opened the door for more experimental entries, for better or worse. The strengths are clear: charisma, action, chemistry, spectacle. The weaknesses? Overindulgence, tonal inconsistency, and a villain that sometimes feels underexplored. It's not subtle, but it's not trying to be. Hobbs and Shaw is not a racing movie. It's not grounded, and it's definitely not realistic. But it is entertaining. If you enjoy high-energy action, larger-than-life characters, and unapologetic spectacle, this movie delivers. Watch it for the ride, not the logic. And remember, sometimes the fast lane isn't about speed. It's about who's willing to stand beside you when the world starts burning. Reviews. Hattie, played by Vanessa Kirby, is part of an MI6 Black Ops unit sent to secure a lethal, programmable virus that could wipe out millions. The mission goes sideways fast when they're ambushed by Brixton, a cybernetically enhanced enemy with near-superhuman abilities. One by one, the team is taken out, leaving Hattie as the sole survivor. In a desperate move, she injects the virus capsules into her own hand and escapes. Almost immediately, she's framed as both the murderer of her team and the thief of a potential world-ending weapon. With the situation spiraling out of control, the CIA pulls in two outsiders to track her down and locate the scientist who created the virus. Those two operatives are Luke Hobbs and Deckard Shaw, men with massive egos, explosive tempers, and a long-standing hatred for each other. I genuinely enjoyed the first half of this movie. Early on, it plays like a glossy, over-the-top superhero blockbuster, almost like an Avengers-style spin on the Fast universe. Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham have ridiculous levels of charisma. Vanessa Kirby brings an interesting edge to her role, and Idris Elba's presence immediately raises the stakes. At that point, it feels like it's setting up a tight, fun, popcorn action film. Then, somewhere along the way, the movie loses its rhythm. I can pinpoint the exact moment. It's the torture sequence. From that scene onward, the film starts dragging, leaning heavily into slow-motion action and stretching moments that don't need stretching. Even the villain admits these guys will never break, which makes the whole exercise feel pointless. If the story had leaned into smarter emotional leverage, like targeting Hobbs' daughter or exploiting Hattie's connection to Shaw, it could have added real tension. Unfortunately, the script never quite goes there. Speaking of the writing, I also had issues with how the virus itself is handled. The movie desperately needs an opening scene explaining what the virus actually does and why it's so dangerous. Without proper setup, its importance feels vague. And then there's the nagging question that never goes away. Why doesn't Hattie just remove her hand? As ridiculous as that sounds, the fact that the movie ignores such an obvious solution kept pulling me out of the experience. I know it's nitpicky, but once you think about it, it's hard to stop. The runtime doesn't help either. 2 hours feels excessive for a film like this. Once the evil base explodes, that should be the end. The movie just keeps going past its natural stopping point. It's enjoyable until it isn't. As the first Fast and Furious spin-off without Vin Diesel, it's surprising how little his absence matters. The entire film thrives on the constant verbal sparring between Johnson and Statham. Some insults are dumb, some are genuinely funny, but most work because of how effortlessly these two sell them. Their chemistry feels real, something that's often missing in modern buddy action movies. Outside of that dynamic, the plot is exactly what you'd expect. A loud, exaggerated global adventure, a fairly generic supervillain, globe-hopping locations, and CGI-heavy car chases. None of it is remotely believable, but that's beside the point. This movie exists for chaos, spectacle, and punchlines between explosions. The fight scenes deliver, even if some performances don't fully land. Universal clearly wants to stretch the Fast universe as far as possible, and this film feels like a bloated but energetic experiment. Hobbs and Shaw are thrown together by the CIA to track down Hattie, only to discover she's Shaw's sister and was framed by Brixton, a man Shaw once left for dead. Now, they must extract the virus from Hattie and protect her before time runs out. Tonally, it's like James Bond colliding with Lethal Weapon and crashing headfirst into the Terminator. The movie throws in comedic cameos, embraces the frenemies angle between its leads, and leans hard into absurd action. Director David Leitch delivers spectacle in bulk, though many sequences run far too long and become increasingly ridiculous, especially the extended vehicle versus helicopter chaos. The CGI is often obvious, but there's enough kinetic energy to carry the thin story. In the end, this is undemanding fun that overstays its welcome. That pretty much sums up what the movie, and its 2 stars, are meant to be. One is the unstoppable force, the other the immovable object. And yes, the joke writes itself. If you enjoyed their dynamic in the earlier Fast films, this gives you more of the same. Just don't expect depth, logic, or restraint. Idris Elba makes a strong first impression, but fades into the background as the film goes on. He has his moments, but ultimately serves more as a stepping stone than a fully realized villain. Still, you might walk away feeling a little underwhelmed by one particular character. But let's be honest, an obvious continuation of Hobbs and Shaw will probably clear that up. And who am I kidding? This thing made more than enough money to guarantee a sequel anyway. We did it. We survived an entire week of Fast and Furious movies, and I can confidently say they saved the most outrageous one for last. This film is loud, absurd, ridiculously over the top, and completely unashamed of it, and I loved every second. It's the kind of big, dumb action spectacle that knows exactly what it is and leans into it at full throttle. The movie is directed by David Leitch, who first caught attention as a co-director on John Wick before going on to make Atomic Blonde and Deadpool 2. Long before stepping behind the camera, he also appeared in action films like Ninja Assassin, The Mechanic Remake, and even portrayed Terry Bogard in The King of Fighters adaptation. His experience with kinetic, stylish violence really shows here. Vanessa Kirby ends up being the glue that holds the story together. She plays Hattie Shaw, an MI6 operative who becomes infected with a programmable virus called Snowflake, an asset a shadowy techno-terrorist group desperately wants back. This organization is controlled by a mysterious unseen leader and enforced by Brixton Lore, played by Idris Elba. Brixton is a cybernetically enhanced enforcer with a personal history involving Deckard Shaw, which adds some emotional fuel to the chaos. Meanwhile, Deckard is forced into the ultimate nightmare, working alongside Hobbs. If you're paying attention, you might notice a familiar corporate logo on Brixton's gear, leading to some fun speculation about future crossovers. Xenomorphs, anyone? Interestingly, the unseen villain was originally rumored to be portrayed by Keanu Reeves, while the voice itself is widely believed to belong to Ryan Reynolds. Reynolds also shows up on screen as CIA agent Victor Locke, credited under the playful alias Champ Nightingale, a name he's previously used in joke marketing for his gin brand. The movie expands the universe by introducing more of Shaw's family, while Hobbs returns to his roots and reconnects with his own. We meet his brothers Jonah and Mateo, played by Cliff Curtis and Roman Reigns. There were also plans for Jason Momoa to appear, but Johnson has openly hinted that this is something being saved for a future installment. Isaac Gonzalez also makes a memorable appearance as Madam M, a stylish and dangerous former ally of Shaw who assists the team during a break-in at the villain's headquarters. If you've seen her in Alita, Battle Angel, or Baby Driver, you already know she fits right into this high-energy world. Oddly enough, despite Johnson once being part of a G.I. Joe movie, this film feels like a far better version of that concept. You can tell he's having a blast in the role, so much so that he even named his real-life French bulldog after his character, and the dog makes a cameo early on. I'll admit, I was hesitant going in. Fast cars and over-the-top racing have never really been my thing. But when a movie stars Jason Statham, Dwayne Johnson, and Idris Elba, curiosity wins. And surprisingly, removing Vin Diesel from the equation gave this spin-off a completely different vibe. In fact, this ended up being the most enjoyable entry in the entire franchise for me. The action is relentless and often overshadows the cars, and honestly, that's a win. I come to these movies for punches, explosions, and absurd stunts, not shiny vehicles. As for the plot, well, it's fast and furious. No one's expecting Shakespeare here. The runtime clocks in at just over 2 hours, which can feel a bit heavy. While the movie remains entertaining throughout, the constant barrage of action can start to feel exhausting toward the end. Still, it never stops being fun. The dialogue isn't groundbreaking, but works. The verbal sparring between Statham and Johnson won't appeal to everyone, but I found it genuinely entertaining. Their chemistry carries a lot of the film's humor. The idea of a secret organization trying to create a new world order through human-cyborg hybrids is undeniably cheesy. Brixton as a near-invincible black Superman is campy and ridiculous, but in a way that fits perfectly with the tone. It's not realistic, but it's undeniably entertaining. Visually, the movie delivers. The effects team clearly went all out, and the film is a blast to watch from start to finish. It looks polished, vibrant, and massive in scale. In the end, Fast and Furious presents. Hobbs and Shaw is absolutely worth spending 2 hours on. It's loud, silly, excessive, and fun. I'd give it 7 out of 10 stars. At its core, the story once again forces Hobbs and Shaw to team up, this time to clear Shaw's sister, who's been framed for stealing a deadly virus. With cyborg enforcers, impossible stunts, non-stop banter, and a helicopter sequence that completely ignores the laws of physics, the movie fully embraces its insanity, and that's exactly why it works. Fast and Furious presents. Hobbs and Shaw is a loud, glossy, and undeniably entertaining ride that leans heavily into spectacle rather than logic. Featuring familiar faces like Helen Mirren, Kevin Hart, Ryan Reynolds, and Eddie Marsan, the film clearly positions itself as a spin-off while leaving the door open for future sequels. Its lengthy title may feel awkward, but it serves a purpose, reminding viewers that this story lives squarely inside the Fast and Furious universe. That means fast cars, glamorous locations, exaggerated physics, and larger-than-life masculinity are all part of the deal. Like its parent franchise, the film operates in a heightened reality where believability takes a back seat. The partnership between Hobbs and Shaw once again makes very little sense from a narrative standpoint, and the storyline itself barely holds together under scrutiny. Still, none of that feels especially important, because the plot exists mainly as a framework to string together a long series of action sequences and comedic exchanges across its near 2.5-hour runtime. These moments constantly bounce between explosive set pieces and sharp-tongued banter, often overlapping or bookending one another. Overall, it works well enough, though it never quite rises above fine. Interestingly, the marketing arguably delivers the material more effectively than the film itself. As with many modern blockbusters, the trailers showcased almost everything, but they did so with tighter editing, stronger pacing, and more energy. In trailer form, the action feels sharper, funnier, and more exciting. Spread across a much longer runtime, the same elements don't always land as well. Some scenes overstay their welcome, others feel unnecessary, and the more emotional, character-focused moments often come across as forced rather than heartfelt. The chemistry between the two leads is what ultimately holds everything together. Even though both stars occasionally feel like they're coasting on familiar personas, Jason Statham, in particular, leans hard into his trademark scowls and sneering delivery. Their back-and-forth dialogue is often genuinely amusing. When the film allows itself to just be playful and self-aware, it's easy to relax and enjoy the chaos without taking any of it too seriously. Vanessa Kirby stands out as a strong presence, even when the script doesn't always give her the best material. She carries much of the weaker plot mechanics on her shoulders, but shines in both the action and comedic beats. Idris Elba, meanwhile, brings effortless confidence and swagger to an admittedly ridiculous villain. His performance is magnetic, and it's a shame the film doesn't give him more substantial dialogue scenes to fully explore that character. The various celebrity cameos are a mixed bag. Some hit perfectly, others feel more like distractions, but they're easy enough to accept as part of the franchise's playful excess. The action sequences themselves are loud, polished, and frequently impressive, though they suffer from the usual fast and furious problem: very little genuine tension. With such minimal stakes, it's hard to feel real danger, but the sheer scale and craftsmanship still make the action enjoyable. At its core, this is dumb, flashy fun, and sometimes that's enough. The film runs longer than it needs to, includes stretches that don't quite spark the way they should, and indulges heavily in franchise excess. Still, the star power and high production values elevate it beyond complete emptiness. I've never been particularly motivated to dive into the Fast and Furious series as a whole, but this film nudged me in that direction. Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham have a surprisingly engaging dynamic, and their rivalry partnership is fueled by constant wisecracks and oversized egos. The central story follows a familiar stop-the-villain-before-global-catastrophe formula, but the relentless action, outrageous stunts, and unapologetic tone keep it entertaining. Some of the vehicle sequences are genuinely standout moments, especially the narrow escape involving Shaw's car slipping under a trailer while the villain follows on a motorcycle with barely an inch to spare. The climactic finale, featuring multiple trucks chained to a helicopter skidding along a cliff's edge, is equally absurd and impressive. Strong supporting performances from Kirby, Ryan Reynolds, and Kevin Hart, who steal scenes as an over-the-top air marshal, add extra flavor. Credibility isn't the point here, and expecting realism would miss the entire appeal. This is a film designed for viewers to sit back, switch off their brains, and enjoy the ride. 2 years after their last world-ending encounter with cyber-terror Cypher, life has moved on, at least on the surface. Luke Hobbs, the former diplomatic security service agent, is holding down a physically demanding job in Los Angeles, while XMI-6 operative Deckard Shaw keeps to himself in London. Their uneasy peace is shattered when a powerful, missing biotechnological weapon suddenly becomes everyone's problem. Both men are pulled back into action, though neither is thrilled about it. Their past clashes haven't exactly built trust, and at first they flat out refuse to work together. Circumstances, of course, force their hand. The trail leads them to Hattie Shaw, a rogue MI6 agent who also happens to be Deckard's sister. What starts as an information hunt quickly spirals into chaos as elite operatives attack from all sides, and the situation turns personal fast. Things get even worse when a cybernetically enhanced enforcer named Brixton enters the picture. Once thought dead, Brixton resurfaces as a near-unstoppable force working for the shadowy organization Edeon. After a destructive ambush at a CIA facility and a wild urban chase involving motorcycles and public buses, Hobbs, Shaw, and Hattie barely escape. Unfortunately, Edeon twists the narrative, branding the trio as global traitors through its manipulation of international media. The truth is far more dangerous. Hattie has injected herself with a programmable virus known as Snowflake, originally designed to distribute vaccines, but now repurposed into a potential extinction-level weapon. To stop it from activating inside her body, the virus must be removed using a specialized extraction device, one that happens to be locked inside an Edeon stronghold in Eastern Europe. What follows is a globe-trotting escalation of absurdity and spectacle. Fake passports, airport mishaps, and a weapons shopping detour with a glamorous thief all lead to a high-octane assault on a fortified facility. The mission succeeds, partially. The extraction device is damaged, allies are lost, and the team is forced to retreat before the virus can be removed. With nowhere else to hide, Hobbs takes everyone to his childhood home in Samoa, where unresolved family issues resurface alongside the looming threat of Edeon's army. What begins as a tense reunion gradually turns into a full-scale preparation for war. Using ingenuity, old-school mechanics, and a lot of muscle, the locals rig the island with traps and turn their home into a battlefield. The final showdown delivers exactly what you'd expect: brutal hand-to-hand combat, ridiculous physics-defying stunts, and a clash of pure force versus enhanced technology. Working together at last, Hobbs and Shaw manage to overpower Brixton, pushing his programming beyond its limits. His unseen superior coldly pulls the plug, ending the threat, at least for now. After the dust settles, the film takes a breather with family moments, playful revenge jokes, and sequel bait that all but winks at the audience. A post-victory phone call hints that an even deadlier threat is already waiting in the wings, ensuring the spin-off engine isn't shutting down anytime soon. As a film, this is exactly what it promises to be: loud, dumb, wildly exaggerated fun. The story barely holds together, but it doesn't really need to. The real focus is on the banter between the two alpha leads, the absurd action set pieces, and the non-stop momentum. The franchise has long since left its street racing origins behind, fully embracing its identity as a globe-spanning superhero-level action saga. And this entry leans into that evolution without apology. This spin-off entry, Fast and Furious Presents, Hobbs and Shaw, pushes the Fast and Furious universe in a full-blown sci-fi spectacle. On one hand, there's futuristic technology straight out of a comic book, including a cybernetically enhanced villain riding a transformer-like superbike. On the other, there's pure fantasy, where gravity, physics, and common sense are repeatedly ignored. When a Samoan garage expert casually repairs advanced, never-before-seen tech, you start wondering if a little magic has quietly joined the franchise. The action is unapologetically outrageous. There's a wild London chase where vehicles slide beneath multiple moving trucks, an armored buggy flipping through the air and crashing onto a rooftop, and a finale so ridiculous it's hard not to laugh, with several vehicles literally chained together to stop a helicopter from escaping. It's loud, excessive blockbuster chaos, clearly designed to embrace its own silliness. That could have worked perfectly if not for the non-stop comic back and forth between the two leads, which drags the runtime well past 2 hours, far longer than a film like this really needs. Story-wise, the movie centers on unlikely partners Luke Hobbs and Deckard Shaw, forced into an uneasy alliance after a programmable virus is stolen in London. Shaw's sister, Hattie, injects herself with a virus to keep it out of the hands of the cyber-enhanced terrorist Brixton Lore. Framed as the villain, she becomes the target of a global manhunt. With the clock ticking before the virus activates, Hobbs and Shaw must track her down and find a way to remove it. Their mission sends them across the globe, from London to Eastern Europe and eventually to Hobbs' homeland of Samoa, all while Lore stays dangerously close. From the start, it felt like this could be a treat for action fans. Pairing Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham was an easy win. Their on-screen chemistry is strong, built around constant insults, rivalry, and physical one-upmanship. When the punches start flying, they absolutely deliver. Idris Elba is convincing as the near-invincible antagonist, and Vanessa Kirby holds her own in the action-heavy role of Hattie. The film keeps things varied with hand-to-hand combat, shootouts, explosive chases, and large-scale destruction, while still squeezing in plenty of humor between the chaos. If there's a weak spot, it's the Samoa segment, where the pace slows and the movie leans heavily into sentimental dialogue about family. It doesn't ruin the experience, but it does briefly stall the momentum. Still, that's a relatively small complaint in an otherwise energetic ride. Watching it at home on Blu-ray, the final verdict was simple. It was entertaining. Johnson and Statham, both returning from earlier Fast and Furious films, play off each other so well that even the most absurd moments stay enjoyable. One standout comedic scene takes place mid-flight, where their arguing escalates at 30,000 feet before a surprise cameo steps in to restore order, a moment that perfectly captures the movie's tone. At its core, despite the gunfire and global stakes, this is more comedy than thriller. The action is intentionally exaggerated to the point of parody, often making its own ridiculousness part of the fun. Johnson and Statham's screen presence carries the film, and their performances make even the most unbelievable situations watchable. Directed by David Leitch, the film embraces the same over-the-top storytelling style that defines the franchise. While the plot is just as implausible as any Fast and Furious entry, the banter, locations, and action sequences keep it moving. It's not as bad as some critics suggest, but it's not a masterpiece either. In the end, it lands comfortably as an above-average action comedy, flashy, dumb fun that knows exactly what it is. I went into this movie fully prepared not to enjoy it. I've skipped most of the Fast and Furious franchise because it's never really been my thing. Still, seeing Idris Elba in the cast made me think maybe this one will be different. And by different, I don't mean award-worthy cinema. I just hope for some decent entertainment. Unfortunately, even that bar wasn't met. Yes, the movie delivers non-stop explosions, shootouts, fistfights, and stunts that laugh in the face of gravity. Actually, scratch that. These stunts don't just bend physics, they completely ignore it. Rapid-fire editing and aggressive jump cuts are used to sell moves that simply shouldn't be possible. I can enjoy over-the-top action, but only under certain conditions. Either the events need to stay somewhat believable, or the movie has to clearly lean into science fiction or fantasy. That's where the imbalance comes in. Idris Elba's character works because he's portrayed as a technologically enhanced super soldier. His impossible feats make sense within the film's logic. The problem is that Hobbs, Shaw, and Hattie are performing equally ridiculous actions with no explanation at all. They're just unstoppable because the script says so. At its core, this film is pure sensory overload. It's made for adrenaline junkies. Endless action, flexing muscles, roaring engines, shiny machines, and the occasional eye candy. Whenever the movie slows down to attempt character development or plot explanation, it's handled so awkwardly that you can practically feel the audience losing interest. Thankfully, at least from the filmmaker's perspective, the film quickly injects another dose of absurd action to keep the crowd buzzing. You know the formula. The heroes are told something is impossible, which of course means they're about to do exactly that. It's a classic setup designed to manufacture awe. If the task were merely very difficult, it wouldn't feel special. But impossible? That's hero territory, right after they convince you they might die trying. To be fair, not everything falls flat. Surprise appearances by Ryan Reynolds and Kevin Hart bring some genuinely fun moments and much-needed humor. Still, While there are flashes of enjoyment, the overall experience leans heavily toward disappointment. The film follows what feels like standard operating BS. There's never any real tension because the outcome is never in doubt. Unless you've somehow never seen a Fast and Furious movie before, you know the heroes will win. After all, the franchise isn't ending anytime soon. Strong villains are what elevate action movies. Smart villains give you classics like Die Hard. Foolish villains turn films into unintentional comedies. Unfortunately, this standalone spin-off suffers from weak antagonists with massive resources and terrible decision-making skills. From start to finish, they consistently undermine themselves, making the ticking clock feel more threatening than the villains themselves. This lack of a formidable enemy drains much of the excitement from what's supposed to be a high-stakes, globe-threatening race against time. While Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham bring their usual screen presence and rivalry-driven chemistry, the film becomes an overlong, exaggerated spectacle. Clocking in at over 2 hours, it plays like a glossy demolition derby that's loud, fast, and logically hollow. The story revolves around stopping a shadowy British organization from reclaiming a bioengineered virus ominously nicknamed Snowflake, which liquefies its victims from the inside. Despite borrowing characters from earlier films, the movie barely feels connected to the main Fast and Furious saga beyond familiar faces. You don't need prior knowledge to follow what's happening. The film does succeed in softening Jason Statham's character, reshaping him into a more likable and sympathetic figure. His uneasy partnership with Dwayne Johnson's Hobbs remains the emotional backbone of the story, fueled by constant bickering and one-upmanship. Meanwhile, Vanessa Kirby's Hattie stands out as a capable and intelligent agent rather than a helpless side character, which is a welcome change. The plot kicks in emotion when she's forced to inject the deadly virus into herself after her entire team is wiped out. From there, alliances form, grudging respect develops, and mild romantic tension creeps in, much to the annoyance of certain characters. In the end, Hobbs and Shaw jumps freely between extreme car stunts and full-blown sci-fi absurdity. It's loud, flashy, and relentless, but also predictable, implausible, and emotionally shallow. If you're looking for mindless action with zero concern for realism, it might deliver. If you want tension, smart villains, or believable stakes, you'll likely walk away unsatisfied. Director David Leitch leans heavily into well-worn disaster movie conventions, borrowing ideas that echo classic doomsday thrillers from decades past. The familiar beats may feel recycled, but what truly carries the film is the electric back and forth between its two leads. Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham clearly relish every opportunity to trade insults, turning nearly every encounter into a verbal sparring match. Their relationship plays out like a professional wrestling rivalry, fueled by ego, bravado, and constant one-upmanship. In fact, much of the runtime is spent watching these two clash with each other rather than focusing on the actual villains. Like a classic wrestling storyline, the movie steadily escalates toward a dramatic finale. That build-up culminates in a return to Hobbs' Samoan roots, where unresolved family tensions finally come to the surface. Estranged for years due to the shadow of a criminal patriarch, Hobbs humbles himself before his relatives to ask for help. The emotional highlight comes from the formidable family matriarch, Safina, who storms to Hobbs' defense with nothing more than a flip-flop when the rest of the clan hesitates. Her joy later, when she meets her young granddaughter for the first time, adds a surprisingly warm note to an otherwise explosive film. The film's biggest weakness lies with its antagonists. The shadowy Edeon organization, wealthy and heavily armed, feels like a familiar evil corporation trope with vague motivations centered on human augmentation. Despite a menacing voice and omnipresent influence, the mastermind behind Edeon never appears in person, which diminishes the threat. Instead, the burden falls entirely on Brixton, the cybernetically enhanced enforcer who leads an endless supply of disposable henchmen. Although he is framed as unstoppable, the narrative frequently undermines him by treating him as expendable. Questions arise about why such a supposedly valuable asset is so poorly deployed, especially when it comes to protecting something as critical as a world-ending virus. Brixton himself is visually striking and conceptually interesting. His adaptive, high-tech motorcycle looks like it belongs in a science fiction franchise, capable of reshaping itself on the fly. His armored suit, enhanced vision, and mechanical reflexes allow him to evade blows with inhuman precision. A brief look at the brutal process used to upgrade his cybernetic spine is one of the film's more intriguing moments, reinforcing his belief that he represents the future of humanity. Idris Elba brings presence and intensity to the role, even when the script limits the character's depth. Leach once again proves his talent for staging outrageous action sequences. The film is packed with physics-defying stunts, from a motorcycle sliding beneath multiple speeding trucks at a London intersection to a double-decker bus being torn apart without so much as a scratch on its passengers. Brixton survives catastrophe after catastrophe, evoking a cartoonish invincibility reminiscent of slapstick animation. The final act tops everything with a helicopter dragging a chain of vehicles along a treacherous cliffside road, absurd, excessive, and undeniably entertaining. The supporting cast adds extra flavor. Kevin Hart pops up briefly as an overenthusiastic air marshal desperate to join the chaos, while Ryan Reynolds' Locke repeatedly needles Hobbs with relentless sarcasm before and after the mission. The post-credit scene delivers one of the film's biggest laughs, especially a joke involving a blood type that lands perfectly. The story itself revolves around a covert organization's failed attempt to secure a programmable virus, thwarted when an MI6 agent injects it into herself to keep it out of enemy hands. Framed for her team's murder by the cyber-enhanced Brixton, she becomes the target of a global manhunt. Hobbs and Shaw, recruited separately and forced into an uneasy alliance, are sent to recover the virus despite their mutual hostility. Ultimately, this movie exists because of the undeniable chemistry between its two stars. It feels less like a traditional Fast and Furious installment and more like the launch of a spin-off franchise, borrowing only the themes of family and exaggerated spectacle. Set across London and Samoa, the film plays out as a spy-tinged action romp filled with chases, brawls, and impossible set pieces. While the villains may falter, the sheer charisma of Johnson and Statham, and the joy they seem to take in antagonizing each other, makes the experience worthwhile. In the end, that chemistry is the film's greatest strength. The friction between the two leads, half rivalry, half reluctant admiration, feels surprisingly authentic. While the script doesn't aim for high literature, it's sharp, energetic, and packed with witty one-liners that consistently land. Vanessa Kirby delivers a strong performance as the MI6 agent, striking a solid balance between emotional vulnerability and fearless toughness. Helen Mirren also makes a welcome return, and the film sprinkles in a few unexpected, uncredited appearances that add an extra layer of fun for attentive viewers. Kevin Hart pops up briefly as an overenthusiastic air marshal desperate to join the chaos, while Ryan Reynolds' Locke repeatedly needles Hobbs with relentless sarcasm before and after the mission. The post-credit scene delivers one of the film's biggest laughs, especially a joke involving a blood type that lands perfectly. The story itself revolves around a covert organization's failed attempt to secure a programmable virus, thwarted when an MI6 agent injects it into herself to keep it out of enemy hands. Framed for her team's murder by the cyber-enhanced Brixton, she becomes the target of a global manhunt. Hobbs and Shaw, recruited separately and forced into an uneasy alliance, are sent to recover the virus despite their mutual hostility. Ultimately, this movie exists because of the undeniable chemistry between its two stars. It feels less like a traditional Fast and Furious installment and more like the launch of a spin-off franchise, borrowing only the themes of family and exaggerated spectacle. Set across London and Samoa, the film plays out as a spy-tinged action romp filled with chases, brawls, and impossible set pieces. While the villains may falter, the sheer charisma of Johnson and Statham, and the joy they seem to take in antagonizing each other, makes the experience worthwhile. In the end, that chemistry is the film's greatest strength. The friction between the two leads, half rivalry, half reluctant admiration, feels surprisingly authentic. While the script doesn't aim for high literature, it's sharp, energetic, and packed with witty one-liners that consistently land. Vanessa Kirby delivers a strong performance as the MI6 agent, striking a solid balance between emotional vulnerability and fearless toughness. Helen Mirren also makes a welcome return, and the film sprinkles in a few unexpected, uncredited appearances that add an extra layer of fun for attentive viewers. Fast and Furious presence. Hobbs and Shaw. Review over the past decade. The Fast and Furious franchise has steadily escalated its action scale, stunt work, and character presence. This naturally raised doubts about whether a spin-off could meet, let alone exceed, that standard. Before watching, skepticism felt reasonable. After the credits rolled, those doubts vanished. This film doesn't merely keep pace with the main series. It confidently pushes the spectacle even further, despite focusing on a smaller cast. What results is a full-throttle action spectacle tailored for fans of high-energy cinema worldwide. The story centers on four key players: Dwayne Johnson as Hobbs, Jason Statham as Shaw, Vanessa Kirby as Hattie Shaw, and Idris Elba as the antagonist, Brixton Lore. The narrative revolves around a catastrophic bioweapon capable of endangering humanity, forcing two longtime rivals to join forces. From the opening moments, the sheer charisma of these characters commands attention and rarely loosens its grip. Elba's Brixton stands out as a particularly formidable villain, intimidating, stylish, and convincingly powerful, making him one of the film's strongest assets. The pacing remains tight throughout its runtime, rarely dragging or losing momentum. Explosive action scenes, high-speed chases, massive set-piece destruction, and polished visual effects work together seamlessly to create a visually overwhelming experience. These elements combine to make the film feel tailor-made for large screens, where its scale and energy can truly shine. One of the most refreshing aspects is how the movie avoids recycling familiar beats from earlier entries in the franchise. Instead, it introduces new confrontations, inventive action design, and fresh stunt choreography that feels distinct rather than repetitive. The vehicular sequences, in particular, are creatively staged and visually striking. David Leitch deserves credit for managing to deliver a massive cinematic experience while keeping the focus on a limited roster of characters. His direction ensures that the spin-off feels purposeful rather than secondary. For viewers who may have grown weary of the traditional Fast and Furious formula, this installment offers a welcome change of pace and hints at exciting potential for future expansions. At its core, the film is relentless action entertainment. Loud, bold, and unapologetically excessive. It's the kind of movie that demands to be enjoyed rather than overanalyzed. Ultimately, this is a film that strongly divides audiences. You're likely to either embrace its over-the-top nature wholeheartedly or dismiss it entirely. The Fast and Furious saga has always thrived on escalation, evolving from street-level crime to near-mythical action fantasy. Here, that transformation is fully embraced, introducing a tech-enhanced villain who feels part cyber soldier, part sci-fi legend. The ongoing verbal sparring and physical clashes between Hobbs and Shaw are a major highlight, tapping into the spirit of classic buddy cop film from the late 80s and 90s. There's a playful, self-aware tone reminiscent of titles like Tango and Cash, where the stars are clearly enjoying themselves and leaning into the absurdity for laughs. Johnson and Statham share a dynamic chemistry, and while the middle act briefly loses some momentum when the duo separates, the opening and finale deliver the strongest impact. Brixton remains a compelling cinematic antagonist, complete with grand speeches and intimidating presence. Add in a handful of memorable cameos and a surprisingly inventive final showdown, and the film largely succeeds in delivering on its promises. Despite the marketing revealing many major moments in advance, the climax still manages to feel intense and imaginative. In the end, this is a high-octane action ride that throws everything at the screen, and for the most part, it works. If you're in the mood for unapologetic blockbuster energy, this is one experience you won't want to skip. At times, Hobbs and Shaw feels like a mashup of old-school action icons and modern blockbuster excess. There are shades of classic one-man army movies, cyborg villains straight out of sci-fi, and even moments that feel lifted from giant robot franchises. But that's exactly the point. This is a loud, muscle-bound thrill ride that practically demands you switch off your logic, embrace the madness, and enjoy the chaos for what it is. Rather than standing alone, Hobbs and Shaw clearly exists to launch its own branch within the ever-expanding Fast and Furious universe, a franchise that has long since drifted away from street racing and into full-scale action fantasy. By pushing even further away from its roots while still staying connected to the brand, the film manages to feel oddly fresh despite relying on familiar tropes. You've definitely seen this kind of movie before, yet there's something surprisingly engaging about it this time around. A big reason for that is the undeniable chemistry between its two leads. Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham were paired together before, and their clashing personalities proved popular enough to justify an entire spin-off. Here, they lean fully into that dynamic. Both actors are larger than life, fully aware of how over-the-top their characters are, and clearly enjoying every second of it. The story itself doesn't always give them much depth, instead focusing on competitive bravado and exaggerated toughness. But their constant sparring keeps things entertaining, at least for a while. Eventually, the nonstop trash talk does start to feel repetitive, yet they remain compelling screen presences throughout. The action is exactly what you'd expect: massive, chaotic, and frequently defying physics. While some sequences rely too heavily on shaky camera work, the sheer scale and intensity still impress. Johnson and Statham fully commit, throwing themselves into absurd stunts and chewing through the scenery with infectious enthusiasm. Surrounding them is a strong supporting cast that clearly understands the tone of the film. Idris Elba embraces his role as the enhanced villain with swagger. Vanessa Kirby brings charm and toughness as Hattie Shaw, and the rest of the cast fits comfortably into this exaggerated world. That said, the movie isn't without flaws. The pacing can feel stretched, and the runtime is longer than it needs to be. Character development is inconsistent. Growth seems to happen suddenly rather than organically, and a late attempt to push a man versus machine theme feels forced. On top of that, resolving key story elements during the end credits makes the conclusion feel less impactful than it should. The film is far more enjoyable in the moment than when you stop to think about it afterward. Still, despite its narrative issues, Hobbs and Shaw succeeds where it matters most: entertainment. It's loud, ridiculous, unapologetically silly, and surprisingly fun. This may not be a great movie by traditional standards, but it's far better than many would expect. As the ninth entry in the franchise and its first true spin-off, directed by David Leitch, this film proudly embraces stupidity as a feature rather than a flaw, and that confidence works in its favor. Among its strengths, the chemistry between Johnson and Statham stands out the most. Vanessa Kirby adds energy to the trio's dynamic. Idris Elba clearly enjoys playing the unstoppable Brixton lore, and the supporting cast leaves a positive impression. The dialogue is gloriously dumb yet endlessly entertaining, and the action sequences, unsurprisingly, are spectacular. Overall, Fast and Furious presence. Hobbs and Shaw may be one of the most absurd entries in the franchise, but it's also one of the most enjoyable. It delivers exactly what it promises: explosive action, ridiculous humor, and charismatic characters. After seeing this duo finally get their own spotlight, it's hard not to look forward to the next wild ride. Director David Leitch once again taps into the slick, neon-lit style that made Atomic Blonde stand out, reuniting with cinematographer Jonathan Sela to give Fast and Furious presence. Hobbs and Shaw a sharp, gritty visual edge. The hand-to-hand combat benefits from clear, confident staging. Wide shots let the choreography breathe, while carefully timed close-ups sell the impact when fists finally land. When the film shifts into full spectacle mode, Leitch leans all the way in, no hesitation, no restraint. We're talking parachute-free skydives, an overblown family showdown, and even a military helicopter dragged down by sheer brute force in a single chain. Subtlety is not the goal here, and the film knows it. The newest additions to the ensemble bring welcome energy. Idris Elba plays Brixton with a snarling, almost mythic menace, while Vanessa Kirby injects urgency and emotional drive into Hattie, keeping the ticking clock mission from losing momentum. Throw in a handful of playful cameos, and a supporting cast helps keep things lively even when the plot takes a back seat to chaos. At the center, the established chemistry between Hobbs and Shaw still does most of the heavy lifting. Dwayne Johnson leans into sarcastic insults and thunderous power moves, while Jason Statham counters with dry British jabs and brutally efficient takedowns. Their constant verbal sparring pushes the film forward just as much as the explosions do. This spin-off, however, clearly chooses a different tone from the mainline Fast and Furious entries. It's louder, cheekier, and far more self-aware. Because of that lighter, more comedic approach, this film might actually be one of the easiest entry points for newcomers. Earlier Fast and Furious installments took time to settle into their identity, and the sincerity of the later films isn't for everyone. Hobbs and Shaw wears its sense of humor on its sleeve. Anyone searching for heartfelt melodrama won't find much here, but viewers who bounced off the franchise's seriousness may appreciate this playful detour. It's Fast and Furious with a wink instead of straight face. The film also pushes further into science fiction territory than the series ever has before, which adds a fresh twist. The action mostly delivers, the laughs land more often than expected, and while the movie may split opinions, it balances familiarity with novelty reasonably well. Not everything works, some effects wobble, and a few moments overstay their welcome, but the experience is knowingly ridiculous. The movie understands exactly how silly it is and nudges the audience to enjoy the ride rather than question the logic. Story-wise, the premise is simple. CIA operative Luke Hobbs is sent after a rogue British agent accused of stealing a deadly virus. His only option is to team up with longtime rival Deckard Shaw, who quickly discovers that the accused agent is actually his sister. Standing in their way is Brixton, a cybernetically enhanced zealot serving a shadowy tech cult. From there, it's all momentum, banter, and increasingly impossible action sequences. Let's be honest, this is not a smart film, but neither is it pretending to be. Like the rest of the franchise, it's essentially an elaborate stunt showcase built around speed, punches, and spectacle. Compared to the strongest recent Fast and Furious films, the set pieces don't always reach the same highs, and the chemistry between the leads doesn't consistently spark the way you might hope. Johnson's comedic timing often outshines Statham's, though both play well off Kirby, even if the sibling age gap stretches credibility. Kirby's accent also feels a bit uneven early on. In the end, Hobbs and Shaw is a perfectly acceptable way to spend a couple of hours. It clearly leaves the door open for sequels, and while it's far from essential viewing, it's entertaining enough if you're in the mood for over-the-top nonsense. You get the muscle-bound heroes, the charismatic villain, the brilliant scientist, the glamorous agent, and a whole lot of faces meeting fists, plus a few meta jokes and surprise appearances along the way. It's dumb fun, fully aware of itself, and unapologetically loud. It is entertaining, at least on a surface level, even when you're fully aware that none of it makes any sense. The laws of physics are ignored, logic takes a back seat, and almost everything operates in a fantasy version of reality. When a movie tries to position its muscle-bound heroes as protectors of the helpless, it oddly ends up assuming the audience itself is helpless too, and maybe that's the one thing it gets right. Media doesn't work like this. Weapons don't work like this. Viruses definitely don't work like this. And honestly, people don't work like this either. What really gets to me isn't just how poorly this movie turned out, but how overwhelmingly positive the response has been. A 7.0 on IMDb. Nearly 90% audience approval on Rotten Tomatoes. Well-known reviewers across YouTube praising it or brushing off its flaws with the usual excuse. You know what kind of movie this is? I genuinely don't get it. Yes, there's a point where you suspend disbelief, but there's still a limit. There has to be. Normally, I'm the first person telling friends to relax and just enjoy the ride. I've defended plenty of loud, dumb, over-the-top action movies by saying they're not great cinema, but they're a blast. I've said that about this franchise more times than I can count. I like these movies. I'm fine with excess. I'm fine with spectacle. I'm even fine with things getting ridiculous. But that doesn't mean anything goes. I've rated almost every entry in this series over the years, and overall, I'm a fan. I accept that it pushes reality. What I don't accept is turning the entire thing into a live-action cartoon. The best action films always walk a thin line, just believable enough to keep you invested. This movie doesn't cross that line. It obliterates it. To borrow a famous sitcom quote, it's so far past the line that the line isn't even visible anymore. What frustrates me most is how easily that absurdity was forgiven. Hand-waving away endless nonsense feels like an insult to the rest of the franchise. No one calling it out, no one pushing back, no one saying, hey, maybe this went too far. Instead, it's celebrated. That's wild to me. It almost feels like the film wants to regress in a full-blown 1990s action insanity, where realism is completely optional. And while that approach can work, I love movies that fully commit to that madness. This universe wasn't built for it. The previous films never operated in that space. This one suddenly does, and the shift is jarring. I had a similar reaction years ago with another entry in the series. Everyone loved it, and I felt let down. Even so, that movie looks restrained compared to this one. That film bent believability. This one detonates it. For the first time, this franchise genuinely feels closer to sci-fi or superhero territory than action. Now, to be fair, there are things I liked. The chemistry between the two leads is still solid. The main villain is charismatic as always. One of the supporting characters delivers far more than the script deserves. The cameos are fun. There are moments where the humor lands, but there are just as many moments where it doesn't. The movie is overflowing with questionable decisions. The action isn't just exaggerated. It's messy, cartoonish, and often hard to follow. Rapid cuts ruin the impact, and despite the non-stop chaos, almost none of the sequences are memorable. The story barely exists. The editing feels off. Even the transitions between scenes feel awkward in a way I don't usually notice, but here, it stood out. And the structure? Completely broken. I'm usually very aware of where I am in a movie. Second act, climax, resolution. Halfway through this one, during a massive action set piece, I genuinely thought the film was heading into its finale. When things slowed down afterward, I assumed it was wrapping up. Then I checked the time and realized there were still 45 minutes left. That moment alone says everything. Something went seriously wrong in the pacing. From there, it only gets worse. A long emotional segment appears out of nowhere, followed by even more excess. The final act tries desperately to inject heart after spending most of the runtime being emotionally hollow. It didn't work for me at all. I was either cringing or shaking my head. And one moment in particular, during a literal world-ending crisis, had me laughing for all the wrong reasons. I recently rewatched the entire series in order before the next installment. Some films I disliked before actually improved on a second viewing. This one didn't. If anything, I liked it even less. I went back to this movie expecting it to be bad, but on a second look I realized I had actually been far too generous the first time. Yes, there's still a couple of elements I can appreciate, but overall this thing is a mess. I dropped my rating from a 3 down to a 2, and that's not something I do lightly. In fact, I now consider it weaker than Tokyo Drift, which says a lot. Almost everything on screen feels artificial. The action sequences look weightless, overprocessed, and completely detached from reality. At times, it doesn't even feel like a Fast and Furious film anymore. It feels like a superhero movie wearing a Fast and Furious costume. When did elite car mechanics suddenly become experts in futuristic biological tech that supposedly no one has ever seen before? That kind of logic gap is infuriating. This film honestly frustrates me, and I can only hope the next installment returns to the kind of world the franchise used to inhabit instead of continuing down this path. 2 viewings, June 23rd, 2021. The timing of this release is also strange. This is an action comedy where the central threat is a virus intended to wipe out large portions of humanity in the name of evolution. Given the real-world circumstances at the time, that premise might rub some viewers the wrong way. Still, if you can mentally separate reality for a couple of hours, the movie does function as an over-the-top escape into loud, ridiculous spectacle. Story-wise, there's barely anything holding it together. The plot boils down to a villain obsessed with transforming humanity, positioning himself as a mechanically enhanced, nearly indestructible being. Standing in opposition are Luke Hobbs, Deckard Shaw, Shaw's morally flexible sister Hattie, their imprisoned mother Queenie, and Hobbs' daughter Sam. Along the way, we're introduced to a mad scientist, a mysterious organization boss who exists mainly for sarcastic one-liners, an air marshal who pops up for comic relief, and a whole army of Hobbs' extended Samoan family. The movie never slows down. It's non-stop fighting, explosions, crashes, and CGI-heavy chaos, often so excessive that it feels like it exists primarily to show off visual effects rather than serve the story. And yet, strangely enough, it can still be entertaining in a dumb, disposable way. It's silly, loud, and completely unserious, almost bizarrely fitting as a form of escapism during a time when the real world felt overwhelming. That said, the Fast and Furious branding feels misleading. Seeing those words in the title made me expect something closer to the franchise's roots: cars, racing, maybe some grounded insanity. Instead, what we get is pure, in-your-face action with barely any automotive soul left. The special effects are impressive, no doubt, but the story itself is paper-thin and frequently unbelievable. The performances are about what you'd expect from a hyper-macho action flick: loud, confident, and not particularly nuanced. It held my attention while it was on, but it's also the kind of movie that evaporates from your memory the moment the credits roll. As an adult viewer, I really try to meet this film halfway. I genuinely wanted to enjoy it, but the constant barrage of CGI spectacle, where the villain always has the upper hand simply because he's superpowered, becomes exhausting very quickly. The pacing is relentless to the point of being numbing. Scenes crash into each other with no breathing room, no rhythm, and no time to process what's happening. Even with a few drinks, it became overwhelming nonsense. That's the real tragedy here. There are good actors involved, and a handful of jokes actually land. But comedy needs timing. It needs pauses. This movie never stops long enough for a punchline to breathe. Everything is engineered for maximum speed and stimulation, clearly aimed at an audience that thrives on constant noise and flashing visuals. It's frustrating to see so much money and talent poured into something so shallow. It feels like a massive waste of potential. Maybe it works for some viewers, and clearly it does, but for me, it's another example of spectacle completely overpowering substance. I'll admit, I'm not exactly a fan of this franchise to begin with. I've only seen Fast 5, which is often praised as the best entry, and even that left me unimpressed. Normally, I'd avoid anything with Fast and Furious in the title altogether. The reason I gave this one a chance was the director's track record elsewhere. Films that were energetic, stylish, and genuinely fun. Unfortunately, that spark doesn't fully translate here. The setup is familiar to a fault. A superpowered villain, a framed hero, a world-ending threat, and two characters forced to work together despite hating each other. Their partnership forms almost instantly, with very little effort spent explaining why or how it actually works. It just happens. To be fair, 3 of the 4 main performances are strong. The villain is intimidating. The female lead brings grit and urgency, and one of the leads clearly understands how to carry a franchise spin-off. The weak link, for me, is the other co-lead. I've never understood his appeal as an action star. It's not just limited acting range, it's a lack of presence. He constantly pulled me out of the movie rather than pulling me in. Outside of that, the film does move fast and delivers some solid action beats. Whether that's enough depends entirely on what you're looking for. If you want non-stop chaos with zero downtime, this might do the trick. If you're hoping for logic, restraint, or memorable storytelling, you're probably going to walk away disappointed. On the downside, the film never really builds strong momentum. At one point, I genuinely wondered if we were approaching the finale, only to check the runtime and realize we were barely halfway through. That pacing issue pops up more than once. A lot of what's happening is undeniably silly and hard to take seriously. Yet at the same time, there's no denying that parts of it are genuinely fun. There are sequences that work surprisingly well, like the physical showdown between Johnson and Kirby, who share surprisingly strong chemistry, or a completely over-the-top helicopter sequence that's thrilling in a ridiculous way. Unfortunately, those moments are spaced out by stretches where the movie feels sluggish. And as harsh as it may sound, Statham's character is supposed to have emotional history with both Elba's villain and Kirby's character, but that connection never really lands. You're told it exists, but you don't feel it. To be clear, I'm not saying Statham single-handedly dragged the movie down. I'm honestly not convinced swapping him out would suddenly boost my score from a 6 to 7. Still, his performance doesn't elevate the material either. In the end, I wouldn't say this was a particularly worthwhile use of time. But if you're simply looking for a passable action flick to kill a couple of hours, you could certainly do worse. That said, this spin-off ended up being the first entry in the Fast and Furious universe that I genuinely enjoyed. It's the only one I'd consider rewatching, and oddly enough, the first I'd actually think about owning. I had a blast with this action comedy. Is it flawless? Not even close. It has way too many no moments, and it's nowhere near the level of franchises like Mission, Impossible, or John Wick. Still, within its own lane, it's easily the strongest Fast and Furious movie by a massive margin. From the opening minutes, the film knows exactly what it is. A loud, ridiculous mission that forces two alpha rivals to work together to save a sibling from a deadly virus designed to eliminate the so-called weak and reset humanity. It's absurd, but it commits to that absurdity fully. I've always liked The Rock. I enjoy Jason Statham, and I respect Idris Elba, usually. Here, though, I found myself actively disliking him as the villain, not in a good way. Surprisingly, the real standout is Vanessa Kirby. Despite the title focusing on the heroes, she completely steals the movie. While she was solid in Mission, Impossible, Fallout, she's fantastic here, owning every scene she's in with confidence, humor, and presence. In a franchise that briefly pulled me back in thanks to Charlize Theron, it ended up being a relatively under-the-radar actress who truly reignited my interest. I'm genuinely excited to see more of her going forward. The film delivers strong action, a heavy dose of comedy, and just enough emotional grounding to keep things engaging. From the first minute, I was on board and never fully checked out. I even found myself wanting to rewatch it once the rental was over. Of course, longtime fans should brace themselves for endless moments, wild stunts, and impossible physics that defy reality in every conceivable way. I noticed nearly all of them, and while I kept calling them out, they never fully ruined the experience. The fun outweighed the frustration. I'd absolutely recommend this movie. Even better, you don't need to watch any of the other Fast and Furious films, most of which are mediocre at best, to enjoy it. That accessibility is a huge win. Final thoughts. I've seen every Fast and Furious movie, but I've never watched any of them twice, until now. Based purely on memory, here's my personal ranking from best to worst. Hobbs and Shaw Fast 5, Fast and Furious 6, Tokyo Drift 2, Fast 2, Furious the Fast, and the Furious the Fate of the Furious 7, Fast and Furious. While I didn't initially mind Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham joining the franchise, their constant back-and-forth banter, once amusing, has started to feel worn out after multiple appearances. Jokes that are clearly meant to land often don't. The same goes for the car chases, which grow increasingly absurd with each installment. There's a fine line between creativity and excess, and this franchise crossed it a while ago. This spin-off, which excludes most of the original cast, looks polished and includes a handful of solid action sequences, but it's also undeniably dumb. Idris Elba's cyber-enhanced villain is heavily cliché, underwritten, and never truly threatening. The plot is messy and overly ridiculous. The series has never been realistic, but this entry pushes things so far that it barely resembles its roots anymore. There are some bright spots. Brief cameos from Helen Mirren and Ryan Reynolds stand out, but they're too few to make a lasting impact. Ultimately, this movie feels less like a Fast and Furious installment and more like a superhero film with cars. The tone shift is noticeable and occasionally cringeworthy. While the action is competent and the chemistry between Hobbs and Shaw mostly works, the story lacks tension, coherence, and memorable moments. The final showdown delivers exactly what you expect. No more, no less. And that predictability sums up the experience pretty well. The surprise appearances by Ryan Reynolds and Kevin Hart go beyond blink-and-miss cameos and genuinely inject some much-needed humor into the film. While their roles are brief, they deliver a few of the movie's most memorable moments and help lighten the experience. Overall, the film is watchable, though it ultimately falls short of what many might have hoped for. Despite its strong box office performance, it's not hard to understand why a direct sequel never materialized. Late summer releases often bring big, brain-off popcorn entertainment, and this movie fits comfortably into that category. That's not necessarily a criticism. I usually enjoy these kinds of films, but releasing it under the Fast and Furious banner arguably does more harm than good to the franchise. The story introduces Idris Elba as a high-tech villain attempting to secure a lethal virus capable of liquefying human organs. His plan goes sideways when Shaw's sister, played by Vanessa Kirby, escapes with the virus and injects it into herself. This forces Hobbs and Shaw, already reluctant allies from previous entries, to team up once again to save her, stop the virus, and defeat a self-styled Black Superman. Even with Chris Morgan, a longtime writer for the franchise, involved in the screenplay, the film often becomes frustrating rather than thrilling. The heavy reliance on sci-fi jargon and exaggerated concepts feels out of place in the established Fast and Furious universe. The endless explosions, recycled messages about family, and exaggerated physical feats eventually become more irritating than exciting. What's meant to be fun spectacle frequently crosses into excess. By Fast and Furious standards, Hobbs and Shaw is especially overindulgent. It pushes absurdity to the extreme in the name of humor and action, resulting in a film that's overly long and surprisingly dull in stretches. While it boasts a charismatic cast and relentless action, the experience can feel draining unless you're fully prepared to switch your brain off for a couple of hours. At its core, Fast and Furious presence. Hobbs and Shaw is an action thriller spin-off built around the unlikely partnership between Luke Hobbs and Deckard Shaw as they attempt to stop a cybergenetically enhanced antagonist. The strongest aspect of the movie is the chemistry between its two leads. Their banter, rivalry, and sarcastic exchanges do a lot of the heavy lifting. Director David Leitch blends explosive action with humor effectively, delivering outrageous stunts and high-energy set pieces that keep things moving, even when the story falters. In simple terms, this film can be summed up as a deeply flawed, logic-free action spectacle that delivers pure fan service. It's tailor-made for action junkies who crave non-stop adrenaline and visual chaos. However, viewers looking for depth, tight storytelling, or internal logic may find it frustrating. The film is riddled with continuity errors and vague explanations that can be genuinely annoying. That said, from a pure entertainment perspective, it delivers. The action sequences, CGI, and large-scale visuals are impressive. The on-screen chemistry between Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham keeps the plot afloat, fueled by sharp insults and playful one-upmanship. The surprise cameos are a highlight and add energy to a story that otherwise struggles to stand on its own. Idris Elba is convincing and effective as the antagonist, while Vanessa Kirby's character feels underutilized and, at times, miscast. The writing and musical score are also weak points. Given the scale of the visuals, the film deserved a stronger soundtrack to match its intensity. In the end, this is a movie that knows exactly what it is and never pretends to be anything more. It succeeds as a loud, flashy entertainer and nothing else. Action fans will likely have a good time, while those seeking substance should lower their expectations. Personally, I've never been a huge fan of the Fast and Furious franchise, Many of the films blur together as one long, excessive chase, but my appreciation for Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham made this spin-off worth checking out. I've never been especially attached to the Fast and Furious franchise. No offense intended. But over the years, the films tended to blur together into one long, noisy parade of car chases and explosions. That said, I've always enjoyed watching Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham. So when this spin-off landed, I was more than willing to give it a chance. The filmmakers promised something with a noticeably different vibe than the usual street racing formula. And thankfully, they delivered. What this movie really feels like is a throwback to classic action cinema from the 1980s and 1990s, an era when excess was the point, subtlety was optional, and realism was happily thrown out the window. In the years after 2000, action films leaned hard into grit and seriousness, which has produced some solid results. But there's something refreshing about revisiting the unapologetic absurdity of the old-school style. If you grew up watching invincible muscle-bound heroes mowing down armies armed with nothing but brute strength and a one-liner, this film will feel right at home. The movie fully embraces its own silliness and never pretends to be anything deeper than loud, glossy fun. Johnson and Statham have sharp comedic instincts, and their constant back and forth is one of the film's biggest strengths. Their rivalry fuels much of the entertainment, and the timing of their banter keeps things lively even when the plot takes a back seat. Idris Elba steps into the villain role and clearly enjoys himself, selling some intentionally cheesy dialogue with enough confidence to make it work. In fact, he channels the energy of classic Bond antagonists, blending menace with theatrical flair. There are also a few surprise appearances sprinkled throughout the cast, best discovered without spoilers. Naturally, the action is wildly exaggerated. Characters absorb ridiculous levels of damage and walk away as if gravity, physics, and basic human anatomy are merely suggestions. If you're going to enjoy this movie, you have to leave logic at the door and fully lean into the madness. When you do, it's a blast. I had a genuinely good time watching it, even if I wouldn't call it perfect. My biggest issue is the runtime. Clocking in at well over 2 hours, the film occasionally overstays its welcome. Around the three-quarters mark, particularly once the story shifts to Samoa, there's a stretch that noticeably slows things down. After such a fast and energetic first half, that section feels padded and could easily have been trimmed without losing much. Still, I'm glad movies like this are still being made. It's a shameless cocktail of old-school Bond swagger, Fast and Furious spectacle, and expendable-style bravado. It's the kind of film you throw on when you want to shut your brain off, grin at the screen, and accept scenes like someone riding a motorcycle up a wall without asking too many questions. For what it is, it works. And if this leads to another equally unhinged adventure for Hobbs and Shaw, I'm on board. At its core, the story is simple. Hobbs and Shaw are forced to work together to stop a deadly virus from threatening the world. Everything else is just explosive, ridiculous, and knowingly over-the-top decoration. And honestly, that's exactly the point. At the center of the story is Hattie, a secret agent who makes a desperate move by injecting a deadly virus directly into her own body. This immediately puts her in the crosshairs of a shadowy organization called Edeon, who will do anything to retrieve it. I actually appreciated how simple and direct the setup is, even if I struggled to remember most of the side characters' names. Funny enough, the main trio is instantly memorable, which says a lot about their screen presence. Movie spin-offs have come a long way, and this one proves it. While I wasn't particularly invested in the light romantic angle involving Hobbs and Hattie, the film makes up for it with sheer energy. The villain, Brixton, is essentially a cybernetically enhanced super soldier, and although the concept does feel like it's borrowing heavily from the modern superhero trend, the execution is entertaining enough to justify it. The pacing stays tight, and the action, especially toward the finale, is creative, explosive, and consistently engaging. These characters may not reach Avengers-level icon status, but they're quirky and distinct enough to feel fully realized. There's no denying that Dwayne Johnson might be one of the most prolific actors to ever transition from professional wrestling to Hollywood. Fast and Furious presence, Hobbs and Shaw works remarkably well as a spin-off, zeroing in on the franchise's most entertaining duo, Hobbs and Shaw, for a loud, testosterone-fueled action spectacle. It's the definition of a summer blockbuster. Big, flashy, and unapologetically over the top. Most importantly, it never takes itself too seriously, which has become a key strength of the later Fast films. The plot reunites Hobbs and Shaw on a mission to track down Shaw's estranged sister, Hattie, played by Vanessa Kirby, who has gone rogue after stealing the virus from Brixton, portrayed by Idris Elba. Once Hattie is rescued, the trio finds themselves constantly on the run from Brixton, an almost unstoppable antagonist who can survive bullets, control technology with his mind, and shrug off punishment like a machine. Yes, the sci-fi angle stretches believability, but it's also undeniably fun. The opening sequence, where Hattie steals the virus and narrowly escapes, sets a blistering pace that carries through nearly the entire runtime. From there, the movie barely lets up. The action is wild, ridiculous, and exactly what you want from a film like this. There are thrilling car chases through London, Brixton tearing through the streets on his heavily modified motorcycle, massive industrial explosions, and a climactic showdown in Samoa that features one of the most absurd yet entertaining action ideas imaginable: a convoy of trucks chained together to take down a helicopter. The cast is clearly having a blast. Jason Statham and Johnson constantly trade insults, arguing over who's tougher, uglier, or more dangerous, and their banter keeps the movie lively even between action beats. Beneath all the chaos, the story stays grounded in the franchise's long-running themes of family and brotherhood. Vanessa Kirby stands out as a total scene stealer, holding her own in the action and proving she's just as capable as her male counterparts. Idris Elba brings intensity and charisma to Brixton, making him a memorable villain despite his near-invincible nature. There are also several surprise cameos sprinkled throughout the film, and they're best experienced without spoilers. They add an extra layer of fun and self-awareness. Make sure to stick around for the mid-credit scene as well. It's both hilarious and surprisingly exciting. Director David Leitch delivers exactly what this movie promises: a loud, fast, and relentlessly entertaining action ride. He clearly knows how to stage large-scale set pieces while keeping the energy high and the humor sharp. With its mix of outrageous action, light sci-fi elements, emotional beats centered on family, and tongue-in-cheek comedy, this spin-off fully earns its place within the Fast and Furious universe. Overall, Hobbs and Shaw is an absolute blast and easily one of the most enjoyable action films in the franchise. The chemistry between Johnson and Statham is electric, the action is inventive, and the movie fully embraces how ridiculous it is. It's self-aware, unapologetically fun, and surprisingly faithful to the franchise's core themes. I loved every minute of it and would gladly watch this duo return in future sequels. Among all the entries in the Fast and Furious universe, Fast and Furious presence, Hobbs and Shaw easily stands out as one of the funniest, and a big reason for that is the electric back and forth between Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham. Watching Hobbs, the larger-than-life lawman, clash with Shaw, the sharp-tongued former British agent, is endlessly entertaining. Their rivalry feels playful rather than forced, and the film wisely leans into that dynamic. The humor is boosted further by two standout supporting performances. Ryan Reynolds pops in as a chatty former associate of Hobbs who treats him like a celebrity hero, while Kevin Hart steals scenes as an overexcited air marshal desperate to feel important. Their appearances add a self-aware comedic edge that keeps the movie from taking itself too seriously. If there's one guarantee, it's that when The Rock is on screen, the energy goes up. As usual, his charisma carries entire sequences on its own, and this film is no exception. Overall, I place it somewhere between an 8 and a 9 for sheer entertainment value. It definitely moves away from the franchise's street racing roots, but it doesn't abandon the idea of family. In fact, family becomes central again with the return of Helen Mirren as Shaw's formidable mother, the introduction of Vanessa Kirby as his fearless sister Hattie, and the return of Hobbs' daughter, Sam, who even leads her soccer team in a powerful haka. That cultural theme comes full circle when the action shifts to Samoa. Hobbs reconnects with his roots and teams up with relatives, including his brother Jonah, played by Cliff Curtis. These scenes add warmth and identity beneath the explosions. The villain role is handled with confidence by Idris Elba, who plays Brixton, a former ally turned enemy. Left for dead by Shaw, he returns upgraded with near-superhuman abilities, making him less of a traditional bad guy and more of a sci-fi force of nature. It fits perfectly with the franchise's ever-growing appetite for excess. At its core, this is yet another save-the-world storyline, and yes, logic takes a back seat. The stunts are outrageous, the physics are questionable, and realism is optional. But if you accept that and simply strap in, the movie delivers exactly what it promises: loud, ridiculous fun. One standout moment involves a motorcycle and rider sliding beneath moving semi-trucks mid-chase, a sequence that's as absurd as it is thrilling. Despite all the banter between Hobbs and Shaw, Vanessa Kirby's Hattie arguably makes the strongest impression. She's sharp, capable, and completely believable in the chaos, and I'd happily watch her return in future installments, especially alongside Hobbs. Visually, the film benefits from its varied locations, jumping between London, Samoa, and brief stops in the United States. The contrast between urban chaos and island tradition gives the movie a surprising sense of scale. As for where this lands within the franchise ranking, that's always subjective. The original still holds the top spot for its simplicity and heart. Fast 5 remains a high point with the team reunited, followed by Furious 7 for its emotional weight. Somewhere after that sits Hobbs and Shaw, high on fun, stunts, and fresh characters. The rest shuffle below depending on mood, nostalgia, and tolerance for madness. Truthfully, part of me wants to say this movie is kind of ridiculous, and it is. But that's also the point. Fast and Furious has never been about subtle storytelling. It's about explosions, over-the-top action, and watching larger-than-life stars try to outdo each other. Complaining too much feels pointless when the franchise has openly embraced spectacle over realism. The decision to create a spin-off may have stemmed from behind-the-scenes tensions or simply the franchise becoming overcrowded with characters. Either way, separating Hobbs and Shaw into their own film makes sense. It gives them room to breathe without stepping on the main saga's toes. The series has evolved dramatically, from undercover cops chasing hijackers to globe-trotting missions involving submarines and high-tech threats. That evolution may be absurd, but it's also why the franchise is still alive. So what should you expect here? Exactly what the later Fast and Furious films offer: bigger action, heavier sci-fi elements, constant motion, and just enough character background to keep things engaging. If nothing else, Hobbs and Shaw succeeds as a loud, unapologetic ride. And sometimes that's more than enough. One thing I've always found oddly entertaining about this franchise is how easily a former villain can come back later wearing the hero's badge. That trend continues here, and the film even drops a few hints that this story isn't finished yet. Personally, I enjoy being surprised at the cinema, but I'm also perfectly fine getting exactly what I paid for. With Hobbs and Shaw, no one walks in expecting subtlety. This is wall-to-wall action, a wildly over-the-top storyline, and an endless stream of cheesy, but often amusing, one-liners. Luke Hobbs and Deckard Shaw return from earlier entries in the Fast and Furious universe, still carrying their mutual dislike. Only now, they're forced to unite against a shared enemy. That threat comes in the form of Brixton, played by Idris Elba, a cybernetically enhanced powerhouse. Watching these three A-list action stars clash is undeniably fun, even if they've all crossed into near-superhero territory and real consequences barely exist. If you're already a fan of the franchise, chances are you'll enjoy the ride. And Vanessa Kirby? She feels like a breakout star here. The surprise cameos don't hurt either. They're genuinely entertaining. Like the McLaren 720S, clearly treated like royalty, as if multiple backups were standing by and none were allowed so much as a scratch. The CGI spectacle, transforming motorcycles, signature slides under semi-trucks, gravity-defying building jumps, it somehow still works. extra scenes tucked into the end credits and post-credit segments on home release. Oddities despite being smashed, slammed, and battered nonstop, the McLaren looks showroom fresh once the chaos ends. No dents, no dust, nothing. The MI6 leadership somehow manages to look runway ready during covert operations. A surprisingly high number of enemies are incapacitated rather than killed, which feels unusual for this genre. Dislikes the relentless focus on hyper-tight shirts and exaggerated physiques. Yet another world-ending virus plot. Safe, familiar, and not particularly imaginative. Hand-to-hand combat scenes that lack realism compared to what you'd see in top-tier Asian martial arts films. From a broader perspective, this movie feels like a missed opportunity for the Fast and Furious franchise. The core storyline is extremely basic. Stop the villains from unleashing a pathogen that destroys the human body from the inside. Worse, much of the banter between Hobbs and Shaw simply doesn't land. The jokes often feel forced rather than funny. And while the stunts are undeniably massive, they're so absurd they border on parody. Especially the final helicopter versus truck tug-of-war, which stretches believability beyond its breaking point. Somehow, even after a catastrophic crash, all the main characters walk away unscathed. The standout action moment comes during the motorcycle chase, packed with outrageous slides under trucks and physics-defying leaps. As an action thriller led by Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham, the film begins with a sharp, edgy energy. Unfortunately, it eventually settles into a predictable rhythm. Big explosions, digital spectacle, and theme park-style thrills that feel more like a PG-13 roller coaster than a gritty action film. The writers clearly attempt to inject emotional depth and character connections, but these moments rarely stick. Over time, the movie becomes repetitive, occasionally dull, and overly staged. It feels like a strange mix of Predator-style machismo and a less clever version of The Hitman's Bodyguard, where the sharp humor that made that film work is noticeably absent here. While the stunts are technically impressive, they've reached a point where each set piece tries desperately to outdo the last, sacrificing logic along the way. Plot holes pile up, especially in moments like the opening escape, which feels far too convenient to be believable. Overall, Fast and Furious presents. Hobbs and Shaw is a serviceable action film, but not a particularly gripping one. It delivers the franchise essentials, car chases, gunfights, and muscle-bound heroes, but struggles to offer anything truly fresh or memorable. Decent fun in parts, yet ultimately not as engaging or satisfying as it wants to be. As the credits roll, there's a bonus moment featuring Dwayne Johnson alongside one of the surprise cameos, and if you're patient enough to stay until the very end, there's another scene waiting with both Dwayne and Jason Statham. Moral of the story: don't rush for the exit. I'll admit up front that a handful of sequences push believability pretty hard, but this isn't meant to be a realism showcase. It's a loud, glossy summer action spectacle. Switch off your brain, grab some popcorn, and let it do its thing. The film carries a PG-13 rating for action, violence, language, and mild suggestive elements. Nothing explicit, and it clocks in at roughly 2 hours and 15 minutes. Personally, I had a great time with it and wouldn't hesitate to add it to my physical collection. To be completely honest, I had a blast watching Hobbs and Shaw. It's unapologetically excessive, running at full speed from start to finish, and it delivers exactly what it promises. That said, I do have one major complaint, and it's hard to ignore. Giving Idris Elba's character borderline superhuman abilities felt like a strange creative choice. This franchise has always been about cars, absurd stunts, and the idea of family. Suddenly drifting into superhero territory made it feel less fast and furious and more like something out of a comic book universe. For me, that element simply didn't fit. Now, here's the twist. Despite that question...